Okay, now my microphone should actually be working. Let me double check with Michael and make sure. Okay, so assuming that audio problems are fixed now, welcome to the first of the Dallas Experimental Film Society's online screenings. We uh, had our 2020 schedule previously posted and had been hosting them live at Top 10 Records. But of course, due to the lockdown that we are all currently going through, we are now moving our programming online. And we're very happy to be hosting a program of films and videos by Dallas area filmmaker and educator Bart Weiss. So, just to tell you a little bit about the Dallas Experimental Film Society, those who may be new to DEX. We are a microcinema film series which is being hosted here in Dallas in collaboration with Top 10 Records, and in particular Lily Taylor of Top 10 Records, as well as the G. William Jones Film and Video Collection at Southern Methodist University, and we've also been working closely with Spracklin Films on this program. To tell you a little bit more about Top 10 Records, Top 10 is a historic record store that has also been converted into a media archive in the last few years here in the Oak Cliff area of Dallas. It has a mission to develop and sustain a piece of Oak Cliff history as a resource for media literacy, cultural study, and cultural study while preserving, restoring, and making available to the public an archive of music and film. This mission is accomplished through the retail shop, the record store, the library project, the Texas Music Archive Project, and small cultural events like concerts, film screenings, workshops, art exhibitions, and classes. Our collaboration with Top 10 is ongoing, and there will be many programs to come. So please check out Top 10 on Facebook and Instagram. You can reach them through the DEX or DFW Experimental Film Society site on Facebook and Instagram. And you can find more info about our upcoming screening programs and their upcoming music programs. They've been streaming music programs live and have many other ways they're making do in the ongoing lockdown. So, I want to say a bit about Bart because I'm sure in Dallas, Bart probably needs no introduction, but since we are technically broadcasting out to a potentially international audience, we'll give Bart the proper introduction he deserves. So, of course, many in Dallas and in the international film community will be familiar with Bart Weiss, particularly from his many years as the creative director of the Dallas Video Fest, which has been screening many kinds of moving image work in Dallas since 1987 and is now in its 32nd year, at least I believe that's right. And they just finished an all-online program earlier this month, and the Video Association of Dallas. Bart is the producer of Frame of Mind, a TV series featuring independent film made in Texas on local public television station KERA. In 2014, he was awarded a Mastermind Award from the Dallas Observer for all his various cultural work in Dallas, which we all appreciate greatly. And he's also an independent filmmaker and educator who's been in Dallas since 1981. Bart teaches at University of Texas at Arlington as an associate professor in the film and video program, and he's taught at many different educational institutions over the years. He got an MFA in film directing from Columbia University and a BA from Temple University, and many of the films that we're going to be showing tonight are actually from that period of time when Bart was in New York and making a variety of films in both experimental and documentary forms. So we're really excited to have Bart. Personally, for me, this is a real honor to be presenting Bart's work because Bart was one of the first people in Dallas to really give me opportunities when I moved back from Chicago after my graduate school experience. And I often say I essentially knocked on the Video Association's door and asked if I could help. And I've sort of been volunteering and working with him ever since. He's even let me do some curatorial work with the festival, which has really been an honor and has shaped my creative practice. So it's a big honor for me to introduce Bart Weiss. So, hey, Bart.
Hey, thank you. That was very nice. Appreciate that. It's really, I have to say, in preparing for this program, just looking back at all this work, and one of the pieces, Floating Encore, was when I was an undergraduate at Temple University. That's at one point the dancers in the subways in Philadelphia. So this goes like way back to the early 70s and through many different kinds of ways I've thought about films over the years. So we'll come back at the end, and if you have questions, I'll be happy to answer them. If there's a way to sort of get them up there, but they're literally all over the place. So sit back and enjoy them. They're mostly short. There's only one that's kind of long, and that's a half an hour. And there's there's stories behind each one of these, as there always is. And we'll talk later.
Okay, Bart, I just got word that you may have been echoing, so I apologize about that. We're still learning the tech of this. That was my fault because I didn't mute my microphone when you were talking. So my mistake, but I do want to maybe just add to what Bart said, and we'll hear a little bit more afterward in a Q&A session, so please do stick around for that. As I understand, there should be an area to leave comments in the YouTube live stream. So if you leave a comment for Bart there, or a question for Bart, or a question for Dex in general, we'll take a look back through those after the program and answer as many of those as we can. And I also should say this was originally meant to be a program of 16mm films that were projected at Top 10 Records, and we had hoped to, be able to show them on their original format. But thankfully, while we're not able to do that, and that's sort of a shame, Jeremy Spracklin, who's one of our collaborators at the G. William Jones Film and Video Collection, transferred very nice transfers of some of those original prints to show tonight. So we also want to give a big shout out to Spracklin Film and Video. If you are interested, especially Dallas area people who might want to transfer film or have other video services done, we have Jeremy's contact information in our Facebook page, and you can contact him there. He does amazing work. So thanks again, Bart, for being here for this. There may be a little bit of a wonky transition to showing the films here, but we're going to do our best, and we appreciate you all for being here with us on YouTube.
Let's
And
go back
be on the
in
lookout
time.
for more programming from Dex in the coming months. We'll talk about that a little bit in the Q&A session. Okay?
And I know I'll hear from them for this.
All right. Okay.
Now my audio is on. Okay, great. Thank you for allowing us to show these films, Bart. It's really nice to, get a sense of, your film practice over the years, and, a portrait of you as a young filmmaker in a sense, I suppose.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. It's a long, and every one of these films has a story behind it. There was a time in my life when every film had to have at least one shot upside down in it.
and the spinning camera, as I think you noted when we made our trailer.
Yeah, spinning cameras, but there are some of these films that have really some fascinating stories, like the Buddy Holly film. So I made that like when I just came to Dallas, and a student, I was teaching at SMU at the time, called me and said, "Meet me at the airport tomorrow with your camera gear and a sound person, and I can't tell you what we're doing, but get ready to get on a plane." So we drive down. He tells me that Paul McCartney has this dance contest in England for Buddy Holly dancers, and the three couples are coming to Lubbock, and I just need to go there and document them. And as his manager left to go back, he said, "Oh, so you documented that. I wanted to make that into a film." And if I hadn't had that like one interview with that couple, I wouldn't have had anything to work with. But it was a really, strange and fascinating thing. And yeah, and all of them have a crazy story like that.
I can only imagine. And uh, many of them, in addition to having sort of wild stories that probably go along with them, some of them are just fascinating documents of the time. I mean, uh, I can't help but think of just what was New York like in the time when you made Jocelyn Traeger story, and in particular, what
Yeah.
was it like being in the experimental and independent film scene at that time when that film was made?
Well, that film spent a lot of time working on that. It came from a short story by a guy named Thomas Dish. It was in the Paris Review. And at the time, like most of the work I was doing was experimental film, and I was just moving into doing narrative filmmaking. So I was kind of living in both worlds. I was doing like research. I go down to the anthology film archives and like look at material in their archive to do research, and it was really kind of wonderful. But making that film, in a sense, I'm making fun of myself and like both sides of myself at the same time. And it was really an amazing amount of fun. But the problem was with that film, the original cut was not funny. It was supposed to be funny. It was like an hour long. And anytime, there were like more than two lines of dialogue, you wanted to like just go crazy. So we had to spend literally a year cutting it down and making it like funny and trying to sort of make some sense into it. So I learned most of what I know about narrative filmmaking through that year of learning from my mistakes. But that was, and I also got to see like the apartment I lived in New York where some of the scenes were shot. And yeah, it was kind of a fascinating journey.
And I guess that film, was it before or after you made Tree Film, which was that's the one of these films I had seen before we started
Yeah.
compiling this program because we showed
So
it
Tree
previously
Film
to
was
Cinema Studianale.
Tree Film was before that, and the story on that one is I was very interested in trance music, Philip Glass and Steve Reich and music like that. And I've been talking about developing a project that would try to have a visual equivalent to what that would be. And then I took this class in optical printing and processing and contact printing. Um, and it was at Hampshire College in the summer. And every morning I'd get up and just shoot these trees I just went and did it. I didn't have any idea what to do with it. And I was, with a different film stock every day. And then in the processing, I would just like, oh, let's just put a little bit of color dye in here. Let's, play with this and let's experiment with that. Now let's just move that and combine that and put this into a loop. And it was really a matter of playing around with that. And then when I got back home, I thought, well, this would take this idea that I was thinking about, like how to deal with that, and then structuring it in a way to sort of get that feeling and that essence of that. At the same time, it's very much about the surface of the film image and like the dots, the dye like coming alive, and seeing this on a 16 print really is very different than seeing the video transfer of it. But there's something kind of magical about kind of being in the zone and just experiencing that as you're kind of moving through the singular space. And at one point, um, it just sort of takes over and you're kind of glowing and you can't tell like the abstraction from the real anymore. It's like at one point it's some trees and then it's just a series of abstract images, and then at the end of the film it's like the blue image takes over, so it's like there's no emulsion left, so it's sort of like laid bare at the end. um so yeah, that was a lot of fun making that one. And that was kind of a fascinating um, journey. The the Floating Encore was my first thing that I ever shot in 16 millimeter, and it was for like this intermediate 16 millimeter, like learn how to shoot, and like I was the only film that actually like completed to a print that semester because I thought it was really great. And I just, the idea of shooting dance out into the world like kind of intrigued me, and I just didn't see other things like that. Now like you see that every day, it's kind of a common occurrence. But as I was trying to sort of live within a experimental tradition, but also, like, to me, dance has gesture and performance as in sort of narrative. So the dance, my sort of dance time was kind of a transitionary thing about thinking of narrative, but still like really playing a lot with form at the same time.
That's really interesting that you mentioned that, because dance seems like it came up a lot in the body of work that we were considering for the screening, and there were even some works that didn't quite make it into the program that were
Yeah.
other dance films, and hopefully we'll get a chance to show those down the line. But dance, yeah,
Yeah.
clearly was the transition point, because the Joycelyn Traeger story also has
Has
a
a
great
lot
deal
of that.
of dance in it, and among the dance also, very clear references to. What I don't, I'm sure there
Homages
were
to
other
many
dance,
people.
yeah, to very clear references to dance films and the makers of those dance films. I mean, Maya Deren
Yeah.
certainly is very present in that particular film.
And very much present in my mind at the time. Also, the idea of shooting dance, you get a chance to really be kind of fluid, and I really kind of enjoyed that. It was kind of like fun um, as a cameraman to shoot that kind of material, and you know, I don't know,
There's
it
something
was
about
cool.
shooting with the Bolex that kinds of lends itself to that as
Yeah,
well, because it's a little bit of a chunk, but
yeah,
it really requires it to become a part of your body in a way, or an extension of your body.
absolutely. And a wide angle lens with a Bolex was great. A lot of wide
Uh,
angle lens in those movies.
so then there's a handful of videos that were from the
A
90s,
different era, a different
yeah,
time.
yeah, very different texture to those pieces. So I wonder if maybe first we can talk about the first video in the program, which is
Geometricia.
right, and that was shot as a pilot for a KERA show. Is that correct?
Which never got made, but it was we made the pilot. So that was so I don't know if you know of a playwright who used to live in Dallas named Octavio Solis, who's a really wonderful playwright. And he had done this series, a saga of Geometricia, and it was one of those things that would play in kind of nightclubs, and it would be kind of like a serial narrative, and it was really kind of nice. So I wanted to do something with Octavio, and then Greg Metz is an artist friend of mine that I wanted to do a project with. So um, he did the set pieces. Octavio wrote the words, and then Chris Doritas, who who did radio at KERA for a long time. Now he's in Los Angeles. Kind of coordinated the music and the soundtrack. And in the other video piece, the Maxine piece, Chris Doritas is the young kid with all of those people are very interesting people. The muscle guy is Keith Alcorn, who made Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius. And there's Angus Wynn, of course, and a whole bunch of really interesting people. And I did a series of these Maxine films. Maxine was a comic strip that was in the Dallas Observer and then later in the Dallas Morning News, made by Marion Henley, who's a wonderfully talented artist. And so Marion is one of the main characters. And obviously the costumes and the set pieces were really kind of important, and the color, although I think I need to color adjust some. Actually, I want to go back and readjust the color on all the films, because all of the Buddy Holly piece, like a lot of the chroma is over the top, and I think it needs to be pulled back. And I mean, we didn't have very much in terms of color control back in those. I mean, there was some, but like if you wanted it more, if you didn't like it on the third print, it would cost you a ridiculous amount of money to change. And so sometimes there were a lot of compromises on trying to get it to balance out. And now you can do that in 6 clicks of a mouse, so it's definitely kind of fascinating.
Right. And what's also really interesting about those video works is they, as much as maybe the Joycelyn Traeger seems to be a kind of portrait of a certain kind of New York life, there's, I don't know, it's nice to be able to have, having Greg Metz and some of the other folks who were in,
Hmm.
in collaboration with you in those videos. There's a little bit of like the Dallas creative scene sort of documented through that.
Yeah, that was like after I was like doing VJ in the nightclub. So I certainly had a lot of interesting friends. It was kind of fun to do all that work together. And looking back at the work, most of the work was done with partners and different kinds of partners in completely different kinds of ways. And now I'm working on several films with different partners. And I don't know, it's kind of interesting that things evolved in that way. I mean, it didn't start out thinking about that, but it certainly has been a way of working.
I'm keeping an eye on the chat, by the way, and I just saw that Lily had made a comment about Carl Finch. Did Carl
Yes,
Finch do the music for the Maxine piece? Is that right?
absolutely. Yes, Carl. And for those who don't know, I've been making a film about Brave Combo for a long time. And yes, so Carl did all the music for the Maxine videos, the series of them, and the music is really kind of great. And speaking of music, the thing about the Buddy Holly piece is because Paul McCartney owns the rights to all of the Buddy Holly music, I could use that without having to worry about paying royalties, which normally would have cost a fortune and would have been kind of um, ridiculous. And that was just such a joy to be around those people who were just love to dance. And I think it would be really fascinating to find out what happened to those couples, like what they're doing now.
Maybe there's a forthcoming film there somewhere. So at this point, I wonder if anyone has a question in the chat. If there's a question for Bart about any specific film or about things that are coming up for Bart in future films, please feel free to drop that in the chat. I know there's a little bit of a lag, so I'm going to try to keep talking until I see something, since we do have a bit of a um, latency thing here. Um, Kind of looking back through. Um, Maybe while we're waiting on seeing if anyone has any questions in the chat, um, I just maybe because the Joycelyn Traeger story is sort of the cornerstone of the program in a way.
Certainly runtime wise.
Yes, I can't help but be really struck by just maybe it's because I've been watching documentaries about Maya Deren in New York and other various filmmakers. I kind of am just curious about what, and when you say, you talked about screening work at Anthology Film Archives and doing research there. I kind of just wonder what the community was like at that time and what, how you saw what you were doing sort of at that, um, meeting point between narrative film and experimental film, and how you felt like that fit into the other things that were happening at that time. If I'm remembering right, that period of the '70s was sort of after, structural film had kind of, really come into prominence, and I think in the late '70s, structural film was still sort of the dominant mode, but we were starting to move into the period of, the films that someone like Tom Gunning writes about in A Minor Cinema, the work of people like Peggy Alwish and
Yeah.
some of those folks that are Phil Solomon, folks that are
Phil
featured in that article.
So yeah, I mean, it was way past the early era, and I mean, still, you had the column in the Voice that was sort of talking about, but experimental film was not at its height in its heyday, but it was still kind of a cultural force. Anthology was really the only place in town where things were being shown and being shown on a regular basis. And while I was there, Anthology was in 2 different places, neither of which they're in now. I mean, first time I was on Spring Street, and then they moved. I forgot where the other place was. Um, but so while there was a lot of enthusiasm in the crowd, and there was some work being made, it wasn't what it once was. And one of the other things that's really odd, and sort of looking at seeing this work, it's like every school I was at, I was like not in sync with what they were doing. It's like at at Temple, they were teaching documentary, and I was interested in experimental film. And at Columbia, they were interested in narrative film, and I was interested in experimental film. So I mixed the experimental film and the narrative film together. So it's like I've always been in this kind of odd kind of place, trying to and my aesthetic kind of mixes and picks a little bit of all of that. And obviously, like, music is a major part. Like, all of these films have a deep sense of the way use music. I mean, the Buddy Holly piece, of course, and the Maxine piece, of course. But I was in watching Joycelyn Schrager, as was really, like, how much music is in that, which is like a lot of music. A lot of it's classical music because we could get away with rights on those things. And then there was like this Croatian piece of music that we didn't have to pay rights for, and a bunch of other pieces. But the music kind of drives a lot of the emotion and the feeling, and cutting to music was a lot of fun during that time. And then, of course, Tree Film is just like, totally based on the music. I mean, this sort of structure of the film is based on a musical set of structures. So it's sort of you know yeah.
So there, maybe this sort of builds on that question. Zach has a question that says, "How has experimental film changed from the time these were made to now? And do you think the change is good or bad?" It's a big question.
Change is change, good or bad. One of the things that's really kind of when back in the days when I was doing it, all of the ways in which you would like the sort of image processing, kind of all those things were very manual and very organic. And so if you wanted to do an effect, you would either optically printed or contact printed. So there was this very physical sense of doing that, or drawing on the film. I mean, all of those, like titles and Joycelyn Schrager, I like did that with a thumb, nail frame at a time. I was like a bunch of nights doing that. There's a bunch of little puns if you go frame by frame, of course, and those things. And nowadays, it's all done, digitally. And not that there's anything wrong with it. It's wonderful. You have control. There are like greater things about it. And I remember one time like seeing an experiment. I don't even remember what the experimental film was. And it's at the New York Film Festival. I remember sitting there, and the film was full of like image processing, but it wasn't done by the filmmaker. It's like they sent it to the lab, and the lab did all these things. And I remember like feeling, not thinking, feeling that that's cheating. Like the, but what, no, and like that's not what you're supposed to do. And now, of course, it's not that at all. I mean, it's like, why go through, although there is a kind of, fetishization of doing it, all these things manual, and there is a kind of beauty in physically touching things in your hand and doing them. But there's also so much control you have of an image digitally. And so, I mean, I think just that sense of the difference between analog and, using a Bolex and, say, double and triple exposing a film at a Bolex, or backwinding the film so you can have it dissolve. There was a different level of craft and intent and forethought, and the way you approached working with things. And now it's all kind of plastic that you kind of meld as you move forward, and that they're just different. I mean, they take different kinds of your brains. They're all really kind of good and powerful and wonderful to see, but it's a very different kind of process.
And we're in a good spot now where I feel like, many of these new tools that had been talked about in terms of displacing the old tools have existed long enough now, and people have reinvested in many of the older methods, and there's this feeling about artisanal filmmaking.
Yeah,
But both can sort of exist side by side and complement each other, and it's all part of the same sort of technological spectrum. But yeah, there are certainly formal
absolutely.
changes, and many of those technological changes do affect the way we see the concepts in the films. So yeah, those things are definitely true. We've got another.
And also,
Oh,
okay.
go
I was
ahead,
going to
Bart.
say that back then there was such a difference between the experimental film world and the video art world, and I think now there's a real meshing of that, and I think aesthetically that's a very different situation.
Right. Yeah, that is definitely the case. Those worlds overlap in very interesting ways. So we've got some other questions. Here's one from Carolyn Sorter. Um, was the dialogue in Schrager taken directly from the story?
Some of it was, and some of it, I mean, it was a short story, and we, elaborated a lot from it. There were some scenes that weren't in there at all um, that we put in there, and we wanted to give him a scene at the end where he kind of freaked out and gave him a moment of clarity before the end. And there were a few other scenes that we wrote. But in every time we would do it, we would talk to Thomas Dish and say, "What do you think about this? And what do you think about this?" And he'd say, "Don't worry, just go ahead. Like, go on. You don't need to ask me, but it's great. Yeah, that's good." So he was extremely supportive, which was great. I mean, I remember meeting him the first time, and like he wanted to look at my film, so I showed him tree film, and this guy and Floating Encore, and this guy said, "Oh, okay, you can do that." It's like, really?
That's really
So
cool.
so yeah, and by the way, Carolyn, if you're interested, that short story is online, so I can get you a copy if you want to read what that came from. It's certainly available.
Okay, we had one more question from Mark Birnbaum, but he just said that he thinks you answered the question in the last one, which was it was mostly about how technology has changed storytelling and that sort of thing. But I do think we sort of covered that. If you want to speak any more to that, maybe we can.
Well, all technological change changes the art form. It's like the nature of what we do as artists. And so there are some artists whose work like is about the technology, and like the surface is kind of very much in the point. And those are the places where those changes are like way more important. But many of the ways in which you tell the story, I mean, cinematically, are kind of similar. If we shot the Joycelyn Schrager story today, it would look somewhat the same. I mean, I don't think there would be a whole lot of difference. Tree film you could not do digitally; it's just not that kind of a thing. So some of them there are similarities and some differences. The point is, every one of them was fun to make.
Right, that's a really good point. Okay, well, I think we probably are ready to wrap up. I don't think we have any more new questions in the chat, but thank you everyone who had a question. Maybe, Bart, before we go, I wonder if there's an opportunity to maybe plug some of the things you've got coming up. I know you've got lots of film projects and multimedia projects coming up, and also probably new things with the Video Fest that's going to be coming up. So I know you
Well,
just had the 32nd um, festival, though the festival is in many parts now.
right.
That was Alt Fiction that just happened earlier
Right,
this
all
week.
fiction just was, and so this summer we'll have our 24-hour video race, which we now do with Pegasus. So that's like a cool thing. We'll probably be doing some sort of a version of a cat or dog festival in late summer, assuming that things are happening in summer, because nobody really knows at this point. And we'll have DocuFest in October, assuming that people are going to movie theaters. But I think that no matter what else is happening, there will be an online and a in-person kind of way in which most of the things we do will be moving forward. So that's kind of good. Frame of Mind, the TV show, will be starting in late August and going through Thanksgiving. And this year, I'm working on a series that I've worked with some theater groups and commissioned them to do original works based on issues of race. And hopefully they'll be done and being shown. And that's very excited about that. And there's a lot of other really kind of cool things going on there. And still working on the film about Brave Combo. I'm doing a documentary about Andrew Saris and Molly Haskell, and it's both about them, their loving relationship between them, their sort of odd relationship, this very old man and this Southern belle, and but mostly it's about writing about film. It's like, what is lost when people are not writing in a kind of beautiful, wonderful way and making us think more deeply about the word, about the images that we see, and sort of celebrating these two people who wrote very, very differently, but have influenced a generation of the way that we think about film. And so I've been working on that. And then there's this other project, which I've been working on for a year and a half, called Firebones, which is something that is meant for mobile devices. And it's a narrative series. And many of the episodes are video, but many of the episodes are also audio, narrative audio podcast. And the idea is that for exposition and good writing, you just, it's okay to listen for 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes of narrative. But when you get to see a video, it like is very tight and visual. And so for different parts of the story, we've featured different kinds of things. And I've been working with Greg Brownderville, who's head of the creative writing program at SMU, and is just a really like great writer, very talented. And that's going to be truly awesome. And it's getting close to being done. It's going to be really great.
Very cool. Yeah, you've got a lot on your plate as always. So looking forward to seeing all of those things. And
Right.
really appreciate you for sharing your films with us, Bart, and for helping me coordinate this. And
Thank you
you know,
so,
I
so
would say
much.
let's give you a hand, but you know, people at home hopefully are clapping.
And thanks to Jeremy for making new transfers of Tree Film and Joycelyn Schrager. I'm sure my partner on that, Mark Block, will be happy to see a new transfer. And it looked really good. And I was surprised, even from an optical track, the sound on that sounded really good. There were little pieces I hadn't heard in a while, so that was pretty great. That
That's
was
great.
it was I don't know about anybody in the audience, but I really enjoyed watching them all. It was like a whole different life ago that I did these things. And so it was wonderful to see. Thank you. It was such an incredibly wonderful and sweet opportunity for me to look at this work again.
Well, for me too, and I, you know, appreciate you helping us add to our program as part of the Film Society. So, um, I guess I should maybe make a couple quick plugs too. If anyone joined us after or missed any of the films, they will still be available via Vimeo. There is a link in the description of the YouTube uh, video, and it should be on our um, Facebook page as well, which is Dex Film Society on Facebook. And there will also be information there about our upcoming programs. So we will be next month hosting a program of films made from the G. William Jones Film and Video Collection by students in the video art course at SMU, which should be really fun. This is all from the year 1970 and all footage from WFAA. Similar to a program you did, Bart, a little while ago called Remixing the News, but this is
For
another
which you had a
program.
great piece.
Thank you, I appreciate that. It was a great opportunity, and we're also trying to extend that opportunity to more artists for another program in the fall. So there should be news about that very soon. We also have programs by Chick Strand coming up, and Bruce Connor and Jen Proctor, as well as a few other programs. We had, unfortunately, had to cancel a program of Woody Vasulka's videos, which and live performances by David Stout and Martin Back, which we will find a way to do at some point, but we just haven't found the appropriate way to do that without being able to do it in person. So hopefully that will be coming up. I'm hoping when we do the Chick Strand program, we'll be able to show those as 16 millimeter prints, but I am working with Canyon Cinema to try to you know, figure out a way to show those as transfers as well. So I hope you all will join us for that. Like you said, Bart, big thanks to Jeremy Spracklin for transferring these films. Big thanks to Lily Taylor and to everyone at Top 10 Records for you know, everything you guys are doing with promotion and hosting these. We look forward to being back in the record store. We hope you guys will join us there. And also, a big thanks to the Jones Collection at SMU. and just to everybody who makes Dallas culture what it is. We have a really great community here, and we're really glad to be able to share it with, of course, the community of Dallas, but in some ways, this is a cool opportunity to be able to move beyond, the confines of the city as well. So, hopefully we'll find ways to continue that form of engagement. So, thanks again, Bart, and thanks everybody.